Good evening and welcome to the Real News Network coverage of the Republican National Convention. Tonight, John McCain made his debut speech as the official Republican presidential nominee, telling the American people the story of his catharsis in Vietnam and reintroducing himself once again as the man who will lead the country to victory. Joining me to discuss his speech is Phyllis Bennis, a senior analyst at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., Jonathan Schell, a senior fellow at the Nation Institute, a professor at Yale, and also a board member of the Real News Network. And finally, Paul Heinbecker, former Canadian ambassador to the United Nations and now a distinguished fellow at the Center for International Governance and Innovation. Welcome, everybody. Phyllis, why don't you kick it off and tell us what you thought of John McCain's speech?
Well, I've got to say, Paul, from the vantage point of John McCain and the Republican Party, it's a very good thing that vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin's speech came before his. If it had been after, it would have completely wiped out any memory of it. It was, I think, a very unmemorable speech, but I think that the excitement and party unity of the base, at least those people that were in the room in Minnesota, is going to spill over to McCain himself, and he will be able to claim that excitement that surrounded Sarah Palin last night when she appeared. Whether that's going to be enough coming out of the convention, I think, is a very big question, because his focus on policy, anything specific, anything of substance, was virtually non-existent.
Jonathan, what's your take on the speech?
Well, I agree with that. At the most immediate level, Sarah Palin woke up the convention. John McCain put it back to sleep again, as far as I can tell. But, I have to confess to you that I just want to say a sort of prefatory word, and it's really maybe, for me, the most important thing, which is that I feel very weird trying to analyze whether one speech did better than another and so on and so forth, because for me, this convention, and also the Democratic convention, I have to add, although to a lesser extent perhaps, to me these are sort of like vast contraptions of politicians and media people whose sort of dominant effect is to drive away and exclude what's going on in the real world. I mean, let me give you one example of that. Last week, according to the UN, 90 people, most of them civilians, were killed in an American airstrike in Afghanistan. The U.S. Disputes that. But there was a segment on 60 Minutes, very good actually, in which they interviewed the president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, who appealed officially in his capacity as president for the United States to stop all air operations over Afghanistan. Now,
and not the first time he's called for that. He's been calling for that for months and being ignored.
But nobody notices it, and this comes in the wake of 80 civilians. This is a tremendous thing that happened, or 90 people, according to the UN, and also a separate Afghan government study. Now, both John McCain and Barack Obama have said that we should step up military operations in Afghanistan. They haven't specified air power. But what about a question from somebody or other? Or what about some reference somewhere to this thing that's happening in the real world, this dramatic event? I mean, this is just one example. I could talk about global warming. I could talk about nuclear proliferation and all the rest of it. But I feel that we kind of fall into a trap of taking these conventions on their own terms and become like a great battery of conventional, of sort of advisors, of political advisors, unpaid by the campaigns, but sort of advising both on what this candidate should do or that one should do, or how we should appeal to the base or reach out to others.
But I think there was something significant in the speech, and in terms of policy, not just in terms of form. Paul Heinbecker, in the one paragraph that he really spoke about foreign policy, one quick little sentence about Al-Qaeda, and 3/4 or more of the paragraph, I should say one sentence about Iran, but 3/4 of the paragraph about the new enemy number one, Russia.
Yeah, it's pretty distressing. I think I join the others in saying I'm getting introduction fatigue. I've heard that story now over and over and over and over again. It's a remarkable story, but I think they do themselves a disservice by keeping telling it. it was really quite striking. There was the absence of foreign policy in that speech, and the Back to the Future on Russia. There was no recognition, that there might be two sides to the story. No recognition that for whatever reason Saakashvili got it into his head to attack the Russians in Ossetia. And it was a kind of it was a retreat to a kind of a world of about 20 years ago. So I was a little bit distressed by that. I also noticed that there was no talk about nuclear weapons. I remember in the conventions in 2004, both Kerry and Bush were talking very much about the importance of nuclear weapons, the absolute necessity of keeping them out of the hands of bad people and the like. That these were the gravest problems that the United States faced and the world faced. Apparently, we don't face them anymore, which I think is a bit, it's a bit of a surprising outcome. A little bit about Al Qaeda, not very much. A little bit about Iran, not very much. If I'm not mistaken, the word Iraq didn't pass his lips.
I think there was a bit about the surge, how he had the courage to stand up for the surge. Phyllis,
there is something. Let me just say one other thing in relation to that. There was another word that never passed anyone's lips, and that was Pakistan. Given that today, for the first time, the U.S. has acknowledged a ground invasion of Pakistani territory without the permission of the Pakistani government, with Pakistani officials calling for vengeance against the United States. It was on actually the front page of both the New York Times and the Washington Post today, and not a mention. The word Pakistan did not appear in any way, shape, or form here.
It's like they decided there's a political turf war here. Obama's going to talk about Afghanistan and Pakistan, so McCain can have his own turf. He's going to talk about Georgia and Russia.
I agree that I've heard this speech, I don't know how many times, his introduction, his live story. And it's maybe compelling is the right word, but there was something added today. He described being shot down, and then with that smirky little smile he gets, he described the angry crowd waiting for him, which brought huge laughter from the audience, as if it was a combination of sort of, and isn't that amusing? Well, what was John McCain doing in the moments before he was shot down? He was bombing civilian targets in the capital city of Hanoi. Now, in any definition of international law, those are war crimes. And there's no doubt he was tortured once he was captured. But the notion that it was somehow amusing or something to be made light of, that people were angry when he was shot down, I think really is part of the rewriting of the history of the Vietnam War and what our invasion and occupation of Vietnam, including the carpet bombing of Hanoi, that he referred to only in the context of the contradiction his father faced for having to order the carpet bombing of the city of Hanoi when his son was being held there, along with several million people who lived there. So it was part of this reassessment of the Vietnam War.
Well, in the next segment of our discussion, let's talk further about the significance of McCain's rhetoric on Russia, because perhaps it's more than just rhetoric. Please join us for the second part of our discussion about John McCain's speech at the Republican National Convention.